Hello. I think we are now officially live. We had technical difficulties. Thank you for bearing with us. But welcome to this week's Sticky Notes chat. I'm Amanda Stockwell. I'm here with Chris Notter today. Cory actually is not joining us. I believe he's giving a UXPA talk, but which is awesome. But Chris and I are going to be talking about imposter syndrome. Do you suffer from it? Do you feel like sometimes you aren't qualified for stuff? And how can you stop that from holding you back? So as always, we welcome questions and your comments where we've got plenty of thoughts to share among ourselves, but we are happy to to incorporate your questions too. So you can reach out to us. You can ask questions in the stream on LinkedIn. You can at us on Twitter at Sticky Notes Chat. You can tag any and all of us or use the hashtag Sticky Notes Chat in LinkedIn. You can email us later if you want to, or if you've got a request for something else, chat at stickynotes.chat. And you can always check out our website, stickynotes.chat. That will have past episodes as well, and you can find ways to reach out to us. So all of that in mind, this is a big one, and I don't think it's specific to UX, but imposter syndrome. First of all, let's just get this out of the way. Everybody has it sometimes.
What do you mean sometimes?
Okay, fine. Pretty often. Let's talk about that though. Chris, tell me about like what are the things that sometimes you get this feeling about? Maybe let's talk about like how that might look in different ways too. Like what does it look like or how does it feel to have imposter syndrome?
Well, the worst time is when you get up on stage to talk to somebody, to a group of people, and you have this little out of body moment where you're looking at yourself on the stage and you're thinking, why am I here? There's all these people in the audience, they know this stuff already. Why am I the one on the stage telling them these things? And if you can't get over that, I think that's one of the main causes probably of stage fright. If you can't get past that and believe in yourself, believe that the people who ran the conference wanted you to be there for a specific reason, believe that actually the people in the audience want to be there because they want to listen to you saying something, and believe that actually maybe you do have a thing to say, even if you feel this way about yourself, then yeah, that can be completely paralyzing, and it can stop you from performing on the stage. And it's the same, I guess, anywhere else. But I think it really does boil down to the sense of belief that you have a thing to say that somebody else is interested in, or that you can do a thing that other people will pay money for, or that you you're worthy of being in that role.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, let me go ahead and say this because as someone, you and I have both been on lots of stages, I think over time. But
Hmm.
I know that, for instance, the very first time that I even like attempted to be on stage, I was like, I don't know what I'm doing here with this. Like, let's talk a little bit about maybe even getting up to the point where you might be
Oh yeah.
potentially on stage or talking to people. Because I think one of the things that, especially in UX and especially as a researcher, very often we're on kind of mini stages all the time. We have
Yes.
to, um, I mean, honestly, conducting research sessions, I always get a little bit nervous before. I'm like, hi, nice to meet you. I'm Amanda. Tell me all about your financial health. Like, uh, it's a little intimidating. So there's that kind of, and it, I know that I'm good at conducting sessions. It's not that I don't think that I'm good at it, but there's that little bit of like, oh God, should I really be asking them all this stuff? And I kind of want to normalize that for people, right? Like it totally is fine to be a little bit nervous. And frankly, if you're not a little bit nervous, it might be a signal that you might not be taking it so seriously.
Yes. Yes. And
Um,
I think, what you just said, that's the important thing, is that there's a difference between feeling that you shouldn't be there and feeling a bit nervous. I think that's normal. It's when it gets to the point of paralyzing you that you can't continue, that's a problem. If you're not feeling those nerves, you're probably too relaxed and something is going to go wrong. Something isn't, there's a thing you forgot. you should be feeling nervous when you do. I mean, you should be. It's like basically like in the situation you're talking about, where you're meeting with somebody who's a research participant, and you're trying to ask them some questions. You should be feeling nervous because it's a new interaction. It's a new person you're meeting. You should be feeling. I want to get the best out of this person, but I want them to feel at ease. I should be thinking carefully about what I do because I want them to feel good about this interaction. And of course, there's this whole modesty thing. If you're going in thinking, "Well, I know all the answers," then why are you running the research?
Yeah.
I like this humble apprentice approach to research, where you're the person who's trying to learn from this individual, and to do that, you kind of need that little bit of, well, I don't know as much as you do. You almost need to feel like you are that in that subordinate role, I guess, to that individual in terms of knowing about their lives.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And I will say this is a little bit separate from imposter syndrome, but I absolutely agree that one of my favorite things about UX actually is that I don't have to be right ever. I can just say, well, I'll find out for you, or I'll
Right,
see what the data says. And
right.
I'm joking a little bit, of course. Of course, I have to like have opinions and
You have to have the
analyze
skill
data,
set, right?
and you have to have the skill set. But one of my very favorite things about conducting research is that you can kind of frame everything as, well, we are here to learn, and we are going to learn new things, and we probably don't know a lot about, either this solution or this context, or even if it's just this particular person. You can always learn something new from every session. But I want to go back to the point we were sort of making before, to kind of tease apart the difference between being a little bit nervous about something and true imposter syndrome, because I want to normalize that little bit of nerves before you take on something new, or that little bit of nerves before you meet with a research participant, and discuss the difference between that and like actual imposter syndrome, which is that different higher level of like, I should not be here, I should not be paid for this, nobody should listen to me.
Right.
There is a level of distinction. So okay, so speaking is a really good kind of platform for that, for thinking. So one of the things I'm curious about is like, because that's a fairly big leap for some people to go from conducting their day-to-day job to speaking on a stage. What were the things kind of along the way? Was there anywhere along the way that you had that little like imposter feeling, or did it not hit you until you were
Look,
potentially on stage?
okay, I'm British. There's this thing that the
What?
British always do. Really? You could have fooled me. No, there's this thing the British always do stereotypically, which is put themselves down. Oh, it was nothing. Oh, anybody could have done that. And I think, unfortunately, that kind of works its way into our psyche to an extent where you can almost get to the point where you feel that really it was nothing, and oh, anybody could have done this, and oh, it's something that you weren't necessarily qualified to do. And so I'm not sure if as a nation the Brits have more feelings of imposter syndrome than anybody else. I'm not sure I'm qualified to talk about that. Oh, because that would make me an imposter. No, but but the at every stage of my career, I think I've felt marginally that way. There's a couple of issues that I think explain that, though. When I started in my career, there wasn't actually necessarily much in the way of training for user experience. We were making a lot of it up as we went along. And as a result, you kind of were an imposter because there weren't necessarily methods, so you were making the methods up. So you felt a bit like, well, I'm using these methods from psychology or from marketing research or whatever, but I'm not using them for marketing research. I'm not using them for psychology. So am I doing this right? Am I the right person to be doing this? And even though you can look at the degree certificate you've got and you can say, well, yes, of course I'm the right person to do this. I got a degree in psychology. I can do this. It doesn't necessarily make it right. So yes, but I think that to that point before we were making about, you should always have that little bit of nerves. You should also always have that little bit of self-doubt. That's useful. If it gets to the point where it stops you from actually performing, that's not useful anymore. That's become a hindrance to your activities. So that move you were talking about from audience member to being on the stage for conferences, Um, I guess for me, I just knew that I had something interesting that people would want to hear. And I had supportive co-workers who were saying, yeah, this is something that we should be talking about to everybody else, and supportive management who are saying, yeah, go for it. This is good for the organization for you to be talking about this. So then, you submit a proposal to a conference, and if it gets peer reviewed and you get up on the stage, apparently some other people thought it was worthwhile. So I
At
think
least one, or yeah,
at least
at
some of
least
them thought it
one.
was, or at least they thought that whatever you wrote in your abstract was probably worth expanding on a little bit. And of course, you can bomb on stage, but if your topic is good, people are going to be interested in it. And one of the things that stops you from bombing is not having that imposter syndrome feeling. So, yeah, there's a lot. I would say pretty much every stage of my career, I felt a little bit of that. How do I work through it? I think in the end, it's that support you get from other people in your life telling you. It could be a spouse, it could be your coworkers, it could even be your mom. I don't think my mum's ever really understood what I do for my job, but I'm sure she believes in me all the time too. So those are the things that can help you get a reality check and say, well, maybe I'm not an imposter. Maybe I've been doing this for a certain amount of time, or maybe I'm one of the only people doing this particular thing, and maybe I should be sharing it with everybody else. Or maybe I'm not the best qualified person to do it, but I'm the only one who's prepared to do this thing.
I'm the only one who is, just because.
Yes.
So one of the things that has really helped me, well, there's two things actually I like to say to people. So one is that you can bite off kind of small bite of something, but there's kind of this saying, right, that like overnight successes are never overnight, right? So like nobody graduates from college and the next week is like, I wrote a book and I'm on a tour talking about all of my impressive methods. There's almost always sort of a gradual build up to things, and whether we've been talking about the stage, that might not be your goal. It's not everybody's cup of tea. That's okay. But whatever it is that you're building up to, like maybe you really want to manage people, or maybe you do want to speak at a conference, or whatever it is that you kind of set your goal to, there are almost always dozens, if not hundreds, of smaller steps you could take to that first. And getting used to being a little bit afraid and then doing something and feeling okay about it helps you kind of build up to those things. So I remember, like now I was just telling you, Chris, before we got on here, I'm like basically doing my own like light management for recording classes at home. The first time I recorded a class, I was terrified. So I had never done anything like it.
Right.
And now I'm basically like being my own light manager, right? So, but you can build up and do small things along the way. So for instance, if you're interested in speaking at a conference, maybe write an article about the thing you're interested in first. Organize your thoughts. There's lots of places, frankly, at this point, you can just post it on your own LinkedIn or on Medium, and you can kind of see what the response is like, see what people say. Almost every I help organize a couple of local meetup groups in the what I'm calling before times when we had actual meetups. Although now we do them virtually. Almost every local UX meetup I know would love to give an opportunity for people who like first-time speakers.
They're actually looking for content for the meetups. I mean, it's often a problem is like, oh, what are we going to talk about? Who's going to talk about something this week, this month?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, like if you've got something interesting you want to speak about, like reach out to a local meetup group and see if they're interested. They might even have a first-time speakers event, and then you can kind of test that out, and then you can apply for a conference. Basically, yeah. So I think one thing that I like to tell people is like, if you've got some big lofty goal and you're scared of it, that's okay. But almost never do you like decide you want to speak at a huge conference and just go straight from never having spoken before to being the headliner at a conference. Almost always you go in lots of little incremental steps. And
if you do, you probably are an imposter at that point, right? If you suddenly start headlining a conference.
True. And also probably a very good con person. Yes. That is a conversation for a different day. But I really recommend to people. So, like, one of the ways that I recommend people get over things is a little bit weird, but actually has some uh, behavioral therapy underpinnings, which is to just do the thing that you're scared of, but a much smaller piece of it, right? So, like, get used to sharing your ideas, maybe just digitally first, or maybe at a much smaller scale, or maybe just with a couple of your teammates over lunch rather than a big formal thing, and kind of get used to those things and build up to them. And, kind of recognize, I at least for me, I don't know that this would work for everybody, but for me, what I recognize is what's the worst that could happen, right? Like, I have all these ideas and I want to share them. And if I put them in an article, worst case scenario, people don't like the article. That's probably not going to cause me to lose my job unless it says something extremely scandalous or offensive. It's probably not going to make any real actual fundamental difference in my day if I share my thoughts. It's fairly likely that somebody else will find some value out of it. It's fairly likely that somebody else, like, it's possible that somebody else will get so much value out of it that they reach out to you and say thank you. Or that somebody will say, hey, you've got interesting thoughts on this. Can you talk about it with my group? So I kind of try to do the cost benefit analysis, basically, of like what could happen that's good and what could happen that's bad. And at least for me personally, like, it doesn't really bother me that much if someone doesn't like what I have to say. So it doesn't really bother me if I'm like, cool, you hated my article. That's fine
So
with me.
you and I are different that way then, because it kind of does bother me. I it may not come across that way, my big gruff exterior, but it's a bit it's I like it when people like me, I guess. So I I worry about making a good impression, saying the right thing, that kind of stuff. Um, Maybe more than I should, but that hasn't stopped me from writing articles. It means I edit them pretty
Mm,
carefully. But you're right, and writing the articles is something that's kind of an easier step, and it's also a way of make. What I found with that is it's a way of helping you put your thoughts together in a way that maybe then subsequently you could talk about that topic.
yeah.
So yeah, definitely. Even if you're the kind of person who does care what other people think, it is worth still writing those articles, doing those smaller steps to build up to the bigger things. And when you get that positive feedback, even when you get negative feedback, it's a good way of kind of combating imposter syndrome. I mean, unless the negative feedback is you have no right to be talking about this, you don't know what you're talking about, and even then, who are they to tell you that? Really?
Well, so here's let me add some clarification. It's not that I don't care at all what people think. I care if people I respect
Hmm.
have a fundamental issue with
Hmm.
some sort of content. But in that case, if somebody's willing to engage with me respectfully and say, "Hey, you found this, but I actually find this," then
Right.
I can use it as a learning moment.
Well,
I
that's a
guess what
conversation too, and that doesn't mean they're
that's
right. That just means they have a different perspective than you.
right. I guess the point is I've framed it so that I don't care when, for instance, and I think something we can't leave out of this is that um, as a woman, I get told I'm cute when I have interesting things to say, or I get told things like, "You're too pretty to teach me things." So I've decided not to care about that kind of comment. If someone
Right.
has if someone has a legitimate, like, piece of conversation they would like to have with me about the content or the topic that I am discussing, cool. If you
Right.
have a comment about my, like, what, in one of my LinkedIn courses, somebody said that they didn't like my eyes as their piece of feedback. Well, I'm sorry, I'm not changing them.
I
Like,
that's
I'm not,
that's so not something that ever happens to me in feedback, which really does go to show something, right? Doesn't it? I have no comments about my eyes in my LinkedIn feedback. You do.
yeah, yeah.
Mm, yes, and
I've
that's
been told a wide a variety of things, and I guess so that when I say that I don't care, it's that I have chosen not to engage with comments like that.
yeah.
And so I think it's important to note that if you're a woman or a minority or any other sort of iteration of thing that isn't necessarily usually looked at as a source of um, reliable information, that you do have to be prepared to, whatever way works for you, you have to be prepared to deal with those kinds of comments or that kind of question, because you are going to get them. And I just want to remind all of my fellow, no offense, Chris, everybody but white men, basically, just white men, that you have something important to say. And that even if you're not like the world's most expert on something, you do have a unique experience. And, frankly, I've had people tell me that it's more engaging to them that I look like them when I teach them something, or that sometimes it's really helpful for people who are brand new to something to actually learn from people who are kind of mid-level and not super senior or super expert, because they forget kind of most basic things, especially in UX, where there's not one path in, there's hundreds and hundreds of different paths. I think we've talked about this before, but I know people who are journalists and scientists and engineers and electricians and all kinds of different stuff before they got into UX. And so, yeah, maybe somebody else knows more about, analyzing usability test data than you, but if you're an electrician, used to be an electrician and you're working on something in usability and you can pull something from that background knowledge, that's interesting to people. And that's valid content that somebody else doesn't have. So I think one of the other things to remember is that not being an expert doesn't make what you have to say not valuable.
And anybody in any role, any UX role or any UX research role can come up with findings which are important to share with the community. If you've done good research, it doesn't require you to necessarily be an expert researcher. If you've done good research and you come up with interesting findings, that's something you can share with the community, and they will thank you for doing so, because it brings more knowledge to the general community, who can then work with that, especially if it's research into an area that's an upcoming area, or research into something which where things are still fluid. So yeah, you don't have to be. If you're feeling like, oh, I'm an imposter because I don't have this level of expertise at the mechanics of doing user research, or the mechanics of being a designer, or whatever else it is, that doesn't stop you from still having good insight and good input that maybe you've got by virtue of being in the space you're in, maybe working for the company you're working for, or having done the research project for school that you did, because that you're the one who did that research. You've got something you can share with the rest of the community. That makes you valuable. The data that you've got makes you valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's just it's not like a fail safe. And I also want to normalize that it's okay to feel like you don't know the answer. That doesn't make you an imposter, right? Like, not knowing a specific answer about a specific thing doesn't mean you don't know the things that you do know. And I think that's where people get caught.
I'd like to say that the further I get through my career, the more I realize I don't know. I actually started off more sure about stuff than I am now. So yeah, seriously, don't worry about not knowing something. Either I'm just getting dementia and I really don't know as much as I did previously, or probably more likely, I'm just realizing that it's a bigger field than I ever thought it was, and it's expanding all the time. There's new areas that we're exploring all the time. And just when you think you've got people sorted out with the user research you do, they go and surprise you again. So yeah, however expert any of us claim to be, that's probably more that we've used more methods, or we've tweaked things different ways over the years that we've been doing stuff. That doesn't mean that we know necessarily more about our audience, the people we're building this for. We don't know necessarily more about their behaviors in a novel situation. I can constantly surprised by the research I do, and in fact, I think if I ended up not being surprised, I'd quit, because where's the fun in that, right? But
Yeah.
so yeah, I think that's a good distinction to make. Is regardless of your level of expertise, if you've got data, information, which is useful to other people, then you're not an imposter if you want to share that information with people.
Yeah. I think there's also something that we should clarify, sort of the difference between strategies for coming over nerves, right? Like I'm nervous to give this presentation to my peers, or I'm nervous to record this class or go on this stage
Hmm.
or whatever. Strategies for getting over like individual nerves is different than strategies for overcoming like fundamental feelings of not belonging
Right.
within an industry. So there are tons of things that you can do if you're, nervous to give a presentation or something. You can practice with people who support you. You can practice lots of times. There are breathing techniques. There's all kinds of different things. But for me, anyway, the sort of thought about like how to feel like you belong overall in the industry has to do with a couple of things. One of which is um, again sort of that incremental doing, right? So like if I if I was a little bit nervous to try out a new kind of method, try it on a side project where it doesn't
Hmm.
matter so much, and then
Hmm.
try it with a client who knows that it's an experiment,
Hmm.
and then work it into like a client pitch, right? Like there are ways that you can build sort of confidence in a skill set or a piece of knowledge or a method that's different than, oh, I'm nervous to give this presentation, right? Those are different
And
things.
it's the same advice given to people who have a tendency to procrastinate, which is break the task down into smaller chunks. And if you break it down into smaller chunks, and then you'll find out that actually, if you've done this little chunk, now you can move on to the next chunk, the next chunk, the next chunk. And it's the same. What you're saying is very similar to that. It's like break the idea that you're an imposter down into smaller chunks. Which bit of this do I feel like I'm an imposter in? Look, I can do this presentation to my team. Look, the data I've got is actually valid data. Look, the information was useful to people. Well, where's the imposter part? Suddenly it's
Yeah.
disappeared, right?
Yeah.
And this is, I mean, so I want to get to a couple of the comments we've got. So Arab saying, if the imposter syndrome is because someone's been doing less and thinking more, because they're perfectionists or procrastinators, then doing more will increase their confidence. This is exactly what we're talking about, right? Break it down to those
Yeah.
smaller bits, do those little bits, then you'll get to the point where you feel like you can actually do all this stuff. Back to your point about people talking, criticizing you for your eyes rather than for your information. People who denigrate are usually insecure. So if anything, it means you're more intimidating than you are an imposter. Yeah, yeah.
That's right. Thanks, Sean. Well, and actually, though, I think there's a really valid point, though, that like, this is maybe cultural, maybe sign of the times, maybe a lot of things, but it's really easy to write a nasty comment to someone
Oh,
about how they look or about, well, I don't, I disagree with this part of what you've said, therefore I'm going to like say that you don't know anything, right? It's
mm,
really easy to write something nasty.
mm,
And I always find if I decide to engage, which mostly I don't anymore, but if I decide to engage, and to be fair, I posted about this not that long ago. Sometimes I debate, right? Like sometimes I debate, do you have valid feedback or are you just being nasty for the sake
mm,
of being nasty?
mm.
Like, okay, with the I comment, it was easy. I was like, well, I'm not like cutting them out for your sake. So the eyes are staying. Sorry. No plastic surgery there for on your behalf. But on the other hand, sometimes say like, other pieces of feedback I get, I'm like, well, is there an element to truth to that? Could I grow? Or are they just being kind of nasty? And so sometimes um, I will decide to ask questions, not to be passive aggressive, but because I'm honestly curious. Like,
Mhm,
well, what do you think I should do about
mhm,
that, right? Or how
mhm.
would you suggest that do you have things I could read about, or do you have things
Right.
that
Or
different ways,
what in your experience leads you to think that your way
right?
is the right way? It
Or can you
probably said
tell me an
slightly nicer
example
than that.
of, yeah, like,
Yeah.
can you tell me something that you've done that's worked better? And I will say, kind of to Sean's point, that probably about 99% of the time that I ask a question like that, um, the response is, oh, I don't know. I don't have
Yeah.
anything better, right?
Right.
Or
Can
Or
you point me
I've
to the blog post you wrote which contradicts this and gives a better argument?
yeah,
Well, actually,
and
I
that's
don't post. I just sit in my basement and troll people. Yeah.
yeah, and not to say I think that part of that though is having like a genuine curiosity about it. If you're just gonna get into a internet fight with somebody about how to do things, and
What's the point? Waste of time.
I personally don't bother. Some people, whatever, but that's not my thing. I would rather, like, legitimately, if you have some other piece of information that I should know, great, tell me about that. And I think that's been a good way for people that I've also like talked to, where people have said, if somebody criticizes them and they just ask them, okay, well then how would you do it differently? It's a chance to learn, but it also sort of helps you sort out what is legitimate feedback and what is
Right.
just people being mean on the internet
Right.
because they can. So I think that it takes a lot of energy, and I want to give people the like total out that if you don't have the energy to expend on that kind of thing, you don't have to. But if you are really curious about who has realistic feedback and who is just being mean, asking people for clarifications about their feedback has, in my opinion, or in my case, almost always worked. I've been
Mhm.
able to really quickly tell from that, oh, you were just being mean, versus, oh, all right, well, let me read that, or
And
let
you
me
can
check
learn
that thing
something,
out.
right? You can learn something that way. That's great. I mean, if it can become a really useful source of information, and if it's not, yeah, what's the point? They were just trying for the sake of it. Yeah.
Yeah. I do want to bring up something, though, that I think it may have come up a little bit in one of the comments that I think is a reasonable thing for us to discuss. Um, Sometimes you really don't know what you're doing.
Yes.
and that's okay if you say so. But I think that UX in particular in the last couple of years has had an abundance of people who have found themselves in positions of power or influence without necessarily the chops to back it up, and given all of us a bad name. So, Chris, thoughts there before I expand?
It's true. I think if you are in a position to give yourself a title, it's very it, it's tempting to give yourself a title of like senior VP of UX when in fact maybe you're just in a 5-person startup, and yes, that's where you are, but it's not really you're VP because you're in the sort of C level or you're one of those first people in the organization, but that doesn't necessarily make you the same as a VP of UX at a large financial organization who's actually worked their way up through the ranks at several different companies, moved into that role, interviewed, convinced a lot of people they're worth of that. They've got years of experience in managing a big team. They can they can encourage people to create large sets of information or large interface redesigns. So yes, because we tend to assume a lot from somebody's title, it can be quite easy for somebody to look like they've got a lot of experience by the title they've got, whereas in fact they don't necessarily. It's something I actually do these days is I look at the size of the company that somebody's in when they have a very impressive sounding title. Because it help maybe they do have that experience, but it also helps me work out how likely is it that they've actually managed large teams? How likely is it they've been responsible for pushing a major redesign through a large organization? How likely is it that their research skills encompass understanding research ops, design ops, all those kind of things, and doing things on a very broad scale rather than just running some usability studies?
Yeah.
So yeah, and sure, those people may still have great things to talk about and very important things for us to listen to, but what's their level of experience? For sure, that's something that you need to work out. There is an opportunity to be an imposter, and it's sometimes it's difficult to tell those people out from just one presentation they give or one thing they write, but over time you kind of get that feeling that maybe there's something missing from what they're saying.
Yeah.
And you have more on that as well, Amanda, obviously.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so I was going to say that I don't blame anybody for wanting to take titles or being interested in taking on responsibility. And I want to like let people know that also sometimes the only way that you learn something is to try out a new thing. So yeah, if you work at a 5-person startup and they want to make you the head of design, well, you're never going to learn how to be the head of a design if you don't try stuff,
Right.
right? Or if you don't learn. But I think that associated with that, and another thing that I tell people who I coach or who I talk to about sort of stuff is to, one, be really honest with yourself and with others about what you do and don't know. Because I think one of the ways in which people end up feeling imposter syndrome is that they get asked things that they don't know, or they get given responsibility for things that they don't know how to do. And then they're like, oh God, I can't do that. I can't do any of these things. I don't know anything. What am I doing here? And so if you're really clear first with yourself and then outwardly, this is a very simplified example, right? But so like, I don't code. You don't want me to. It's not my favorite. It's not a good use of time. It's not a good use of money. It's not the best for anyone involved. So I'm very clear about that. Right? Like I can if I need to for something, but I don't tell anybody that I'm good at that. In fact, I actively tell people, don't hire me for that. I'll find you somebody else, right? And I think what that does when you can be clear about the things that you're not so good at or that you don't have experience in, then it can help you feel really confident about the thing that you're like, that's not my thing. This is, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, especially in UX, because there's such a wide range of skill sets and potential expertise, it's okay to say, I'm a really great interaction designer, but I kind of suck at visual design
Mm-hmm.
or whatever variation of things those are. And I have found that when people I have talked to who are maybe a little bit earlier on in their careers or even later, when you start being really clear about what you're not great at, it helps you feel more confident about what you are good at. And so,
Bingo.
and that can be true both within UX skills and also like as managerial skills or leadership skills or other kinds of skills come into play. If you've been an individual contributor for 10 years and then somebody sticks you in a C-level role, it's okay for you to say, hey, I'm really good at conducting research, but I don't know how to put this budget together.
Right.
I've never learned how to do this before.
Right.
And at least for me and some of the other people that I've talked to, that recognition of here's what I'm good at and here's what I'm not helps to feel confident.
And you will be asked to do things outside of your comfort zone as a UX person quite often. And I mean, I am still now by clients. And sometimes I say, I can't do that. I don't want to do that for you because it's not some, I wouldn't be doing you a favor by doing it, but here's somebody who can. Other times I say, it's a really interesting piece of research. I want to do that with you, but I've never done that before. I know what the technique is, or I think I know how we could approach that. Let's talk about that in more detail and see if you and I can come to an agreement about what does work to do in this situation. And then I learn as well, but I'm not being an imposter. I'm not saying, oh yeah, I can deal with that. And then going away thinking, I'm at the point, I'm being honest with them up front. And that creates so much less stress longer term than this idea that what is it? Fake it till you make it. That's such an 80s statement, really, isn't it? It's like you almost see the used car salesman kind of approach to it. I think there's still people who advocate that now, but yes, I'm old enough to remember the 80s. So it's really just this weird concept that you should be lying to people about your skills until you've got those skills. Well, how are you going to get the skills if you're lying to people about them? If instead, like you say, Amanda, you say, great that you want me to do this role, this UX executive role. I can do the UX side. I'm not sure about all the executiving stuff. Can you give me help with that? Then you've been honest. And you don't have to fake it because you can actually get the assistance you need to make it happen.
Yeah, I think there's a fine line between appearing confident and just pretending that you can do things that you have no experience in. And sometimes, let's just be clear, sometimes that works out and nobody ever knows. But to your point, it's so stressful. And at least with client work, and actually I found this a lot, like working internally at teams too, it builds trust with people if you're able to admit to them when you don't know how to do something, or if you haven't tried something before. I have, to your point, absolutely been asked by clients to do things that I'm like, that's not really my specialty, but I've done this and this. Maybe we can figure it out.
Yeah. Especially when it sounds exciting and fun. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, please let me have a go at that. And I'm not going to say, oh, I'm going to give you a massive discount for it. But I might say, look, because this is something I haven't done, let's just do a little pilot of it and see how it goes. I don't want to waste your money. Let's try it out first. Yeah.
Yeah. But I will say, I have never, to my knowledge anyway, lost a client or lost a project because I said, I've done something similar. I haven't done quite that thing. I think that we could get you at the same information if we did this, but let's test it out. I've never lost a client or a project from that approach. I know
I've never lost a client by referring them to somebody else either. They'll come back to me when they want the stuff I do next time, or when they want somebody else to do something else. They'll be like, you're a great source of all these other people that I need for my other work.
Yep. And the other thing is that I haven't personally, because I don't do this, but I know other people who have lost clients because they have said yes to things that they do not know how to do.
And it's so stressful, and it's so, you feel bad. You feel terrible, and I think that might even contribute to imposter syndrome, because you failed to deliver what you should have done. You were an imposter, so next time you're going to be so much more cautious about everything you do. Longer term, probably not the best way to approach things.
Yeah. All right, well, we are almost out of time. We've gone sort of around in a circle talking about imposter syndrome, but so let me leave it with this to sort of, I don't know if this is exactly motivational or inspirational, but it is totally normal to feel scared sometimes or nervous sometimes about things that you've never done before. I want to encourage people to try new things, but try them in bite-sized chunks and get comfortable and be honest about when you're trying something new. Don't pretend that you're a pro at it. And then, and then eventually things that used to be really scary or used to make you feel really unconfident will probably become less scary, and they'll feel more like they're right in your comfort zone.
And then you aren't an imposter anymore because you've done it already. So you feel confident, and you feel confident getting up on that stage and talking to people about it because you stood on a smaller stage and talked to less people about it, or you sat in front of your team and talked to them about it. Yeah, and it never goes away. The feeling never goes away. You're not going to remove it. It's just finding techniques for dealing with that feeling and making it so that you feel able to get around imposter syndrome and still do your work. If it does go away for you, great. Congratulations.
If you have any hot tips, let us know. We're always down for hot tips.
I used to have imposter syndrome. Then I called myself VP of user research, and it all went away.
I don't think that works. I don't know. No. All right, great. Well, Chris, thanks for chatting. As always, it was fun. And everybody who tuned in, thank you, and asked us a question. We appreciate it. If we didn't get to your question, we will respond afterwards. As always, if you've got requests for next week, then feel free to reach out to us. The usual ways: you can at any of the three of us on LinkedIn or on Twitter at Stickynotes Chat. You can use the hashtag Stickynotes or tag any of us on LinkedIn. Or you can email us, chat at stickynotes.chat, or you can visit our website if you want to watch some past episodes or have yet another way to reach out to us. So with that, thank you so much. We'll see you next week. Bye, Chris.